My name is Vanessa, and I grew up in a family that could be called large, but with each passing year, this large family became emptier and emptier for me. My father was obsessed with the idea of having a son, and he and my mother tried again and again. He never said this to me directly, but I felt it in every look, in every word. He wanted me to become an older sister, to have a strong boy by my side who would be a continuation of him. He didn't understand that with each new attempt and failure, my mother became more and more exhausted, and her health began to deteriorate. Several years passed, and each time I heard about a new pregnancy, I was genuinely happy for my mother, but deep down, something told me that this happiness wouldn't be ours, mine, or my sister's. My mother became pregnant again and again, but at some point, the doctors firmly stated that it was becoming too risky. And then, when I had already begun to forget what it felt like to hope for equal attention, they suddenly opened up to me about their true feelings. Finding myself in such a situation, I realized that I would have to become not just a daughter or a sister, but the one who would bear the full weight of family life. My younger sisters were wonderful, but the burden of everyday life rested solely on my shoulders. I changed diapers, did the laundry, cooked meals, which sometimes felt like an overwhelming load, especially when I saw other children running around the yard, enjoying a carefree childhood. They played and laughed, and I woke up early and went to bed late, making sure everything in the house was in order, that my sisters were fed, that my mother could rest. My mother never said this to me directly, but in her gaze, I felt a gratitude that was both heavy and vulnerable. But everything changed when my youngest sister was born. She was such a long-awaited miracle for all of us that it seemed as though the whole family had come back to life. My mother and father no longer saw me. For them, the only thing that mattered was the little princess. She became the center of the universe, and all attention was now focused solely on her. The best toys, the most expensive things, the most complex activities, all of it was for her. My old responsibilities were completely forgotten. I remember the day I was 14 years old. I accidentally overheard a phone conversation my mother was having, and those words, like a knife to my heart, still echo in my memory. I just don't have time for the older girls anymore, they can't handle it. Vanessa, although she's such a good helper, but a helper. I had become just a helper. Not a daughter. Not a sister. Just a helper, like one of the household tools. That was the moment I realized that there was no longer a place for me in the family. I felt myself disappearing, invisible, deprived of my right to a future of my own. But there was one person who always remained a true source of support for me, my grandmother. My mother and she had had a huge falling out many years ago and hadn't spoken since. However, I found her number and began secretly communicating with her, confiding my feelings and hopes. She never judged me, on the contrary, she always supported me, even when I felt like the world was falling apart around me. She was my secret, my salvation, my only support in this house. As I grew older, I began to dream of college, of life outside these walls, of a future where I could be someone more than just a nanny for my sisters. I wanted to find my place in the world, dreamt of knowledge, of studying, of freedom. When I finished high school and received an offer to enroll in university, it felt like a miracle. I was on cloud 9 with happiness, but my parents didn't share my excitement. I remember my father's face when he said to me, "You don't have money for your education, Vanessa. You have to work to help the family. We need to provide for your sister." These words echoed in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Everything I had done for the family, everything I had endured for their sake, didn't matter. I was nothing. I left that night. I cried, I was angry, but I did it. I didn't know how I would live next, but I knew one thing: I could no longer be a part of that house. My sisters stood in the doorway, crying, begging me to stay, but I knew that this wasn't my path. I told them I would always be there for them, but I had to leave. As I was walking out, I heard my father's cold, resolute voice: "You are not to have any contact with Vanessa." And with that, I left. One night, I received a call from an unknown number. My heart raced as I answered. A thought immediately flashed through my mind. What if it's a mistake? What if it's someone who dialed the wrong number? But when I heard the soft, almost inaudible whisper, I recognized the voice of my second youngest sister, Francesca. In that moment, I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I couldn't hold back the emotion. Francesca. It was her. Francesca, is that you? I whispered barely audibly, almost not believing my happiness. It had been such a long and necessary conversation. Yes, it's me, she answered nervously and quietly, so no one could hear. I'm using my friend's phone. Mom and Dad can't know. We spoke for hours, unable to stop, as though we were trying to rebuild the connection that years of silence and prohibitions had destroyed. She told me how life at home had changed after I left, how my parents had become even stricter, how their attention was entirely focused on little Simona, who, as always, was their golden child. Francesca couldn't hide the pain in her voice as she spoke of how hard it had become for her to live in that house. She told me how much she missed me, how much they all missed me, and even Simona had become less cold, although, as before, she remained at the center of their world. Vanessa, she continued, Simona told Mom and Dad that we were calling you. They took our phones away, but don't worry, we'll find ways to stay in touch. We love you, Vanessa. The secret calls became my lifeline, keeping me from drowning in loneliness. Through these calls, I again felt like part of the family, even if just for a short moment. We talked about life, our dreams, and I shared my college experiences, how I was studying and growing up. It wasn't quite the same as being there, but still, it was something. In moments when I became lost in my studies, when the grind of academics pulled me into its labyrinth, I felt needed, alive. I suddenly realized that I was succeeding, that my professors noticed my achievements, that I was being recommended for internships and various projects. This was my path, my chance, and I couldn't stop. Years flew by, and with every step, every success, I inevitably thought about my sisters, about the fact that I had left them in that house. There were moments when I heard their voices, when they told me how Simona continued to be the star, how she participated in clubs, how her attention captivated both our parents and her peers. But, as hard as it was, I no longer had a place in that world. I couldn't accept that my sisters were going through the same thing I had, that they too were now ignored, rejected. It tore my heart apart. And then came the moment when I was finishing my studies. A mix of excitement and anxiety overwhelmed me, but I also felt immense pride. My grandmother, who had always been there for me and supported me, was my guiding light in that moment. Her voice on the phone, her words that she was proud of me, that Grandpa would have been proud too, gave me strength and motivation to keep moving forward. I knew she would be there, even if my parents didn't support me. When I received my diploma and found myself in a crowd of graduates, I scanned the crowd for familiar faces, hoping to see my parents, at least this time. But they weren't there. Only my grandmother shone with pride, and with her by my side, I felt safe and valued. I entered a new stage of my life, built my career, and although the work was challenging, I was succeeding. Life became routine, but it was my own routine. I was building my life on my terms. When the time came for the annual corporate party, I almost declined. I felt out of place, not wanting to step into a world full of strangers' faces and shallow conversations. But my colleague Jen insisted we go. She begged me, promising it would be fun, and mentioned that there might be major company partners there, a great opportunity for career networking. The party was in full swing when I arrived, and at first, I felt out of place. In the background, light jazz played, sounding as though it had been created just for this moment, to add ease and comfort to the atmosphere. People were laughing, chatting, mixing drinks in their hands, creating a whirlpool of energy around them. I was about to make a punch bowl, but I literally bumped into someone. For a moment, I was confused. I tried to apologize, looked up, and suddenly found myself staring into a pair of warm brown eyes, full of kindness and genuine interest. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I quickly said, hoping nothing bad had happened. I looked up, meeting the stranger's smile. "Sorry, I continued, a little flustered. "No problem," he replied, his voice warm and almost reassuring. My name is Alvis, by the way. I don't think we've met. You're Vanessa, right? Yes, I answered, shaking his hand. I'm from the economics department. We began talking, and soon I learned that Alvis was the head of one of the company's major partners. He turned out to be smart, funny, and easy to talk to. His manner of speaking was relaxed, and his interest in my life seemed genuine. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and the evening was slowly winding down. Alvis came up to me, smiling. Do you mind if I take your number? I'd love to continue this conversation over coffee, he said. I hesitated slightly, but then thought, why not? After all, I had spent so many years caring for others, always putting the needs and interests of my family first. Maybe it was time to think about myself, to let someone take care of me, even for just a moment. I allowed myself that moment, deciding not to let Alvis slip out of my life. Our first date smoothly turned into a second, and then a third. We met often, chatted, laughed. And before I realized it, we became a couple. Alvis was everything I didn't know I wanted, kind, attentive, and he really listened when I spoke. It was like I had found my other half. A year later, he proposed. As we began planning our wedding, I faced a difficult dilemma. Should I invite my family, despite everything that had happened between us over the years? They were still my parents, my sisters, even if everything had changed. I thought about it and sent invitations to my parents and all my sisters, even Simona. Of course, I couldn't forget my grandmother, the one who had always been there, supporting me despite all the disagreements with my parents. Weeks passed, and I hadn't heard anything from my family. And then one day, Francesca called me. Her voice was trembling, filled with worry. Vanessa, we got your invitation. Mom and Dad won't let us come. They didn't even allow us to send you a card. It was a painful subject that I had tried to forget. On the day of my wedding, when I stood before the mirror in my white dress, a mixture of emotions suddenly overtook me, joy for the upcoming day, but also sadness because my parents and my sisters weren't there. And though they weren't present in that moment, I felt my grandmother, who entered the room with a shining look, embrace me. Oh, Vanessa, she whispered, holding back tears. You look stunning. I'm so proud of you. As I walked down the aisle toward Alvis, I looked around and saw only the faces of our friends, his family, and my grandmother. My family didn't come. But I realized an important truth: family isn't always about blood. It's about love, support, and acceptance, those who are there for you despite everything. The years that followed our wedding were filled with love and laughter. Alvis and I began building our life together. We worked, traveled, and explored new hobbies. We endlessly talked about our future, about children, and one day, at some point, we decided it was time to try and have a child. Months passed, then a year, two, and nothing. We underwent all possible tests, tried every specialist's advice, but pregnancy never came. It was heartbreaking. Time went by, and we suffered the pain of loss with each new cycle that failed to bring the desired result. The following years became a real roller coaster for us, full of hopes, disappointments, and unsuccessful attempts. And one day, after yet another failed treatment, when it seemed like all my strength had been drained, I broke down. Tears ran down my cheeks as I whispered quietly, maybe we're just not meant to be parents. I cried on Alvis's chest, his strong arms wrapped around me, and he gently stroked my hair as if trying to pass all his strength to me. In that moment, it felt like I had lost everything, but his words, full of warmth and confidence, pierced my heart. Hey, look at me, he said softly, lifting my chin so I would meet his gaze. We will become parents. Maybe not in the way we first imagined, but we will. What do you think about that? I wiped away my tears, and although it didn't happen right away, I felt a glimmer of hope push through my pain. Adoption. Why not? We could give a child a home full of love, care, and warmth. And that was enough. Okay, I said, trying to suppress my sobs. Let's do it. Let's adopt. The adoption process was incredibly long and often painful. Endless forms, interviews, home studies, we went through it all. But every step only strengthened our resolve to give love to the child we had been waiting for. Finally, after many months of waiting, the day came when we got the call and were invited to meet. When we first met Paula, I remember that moment in every tiny detail. She was a little girl with big brown eyes, dark skin, and a clear fear in her gaze. She clung to her social worker's hand like it was an anchor in a stormy sea. I crouched down to her level and, holding back my emotions, quietly said, "Hello, Paula. I'm Vanessa, and this is Alvis. We've been waiting to meet you for so long." Paula looked at us with tired eyes, and then, as though not expecting anything better, she turned back to her social worker. She extended her hand, and shyly, she took mine. In that moment, I felt something tender and real awaken inside me. This was our daughter. We didn't care that she didn't look like us, that she didn't have our DNA. She was ours. And we were hers. When Paula turned 5, we sat with her in the cozy living room and told her how she became part of our family. We showed her photos from the day we first met, told her how much we wanted her and how we fell in love with her in that very moment. Paula listened carefully, her little brows furrowed as she tried to understand our words. When we finished, she fell silent, deep in thought. "So, you chose me?" she asked, looking at us with eyes full of genuine curiosity. I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes, but I tried to smile as confidently as I could. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, hugging her. "Out of all the children in the world, we chose you. And we would choose you again, every time." She smiled back at us, and her little hands wrapped around us, pulling us into a tight hug. "I love you, Mom and Dad," she said, and in those words was so much sincerity that my heart literally melted. When I held my daughter close, my mind drifted back to the past. I remembered my own childhood, all those years when I felt unwanted, unappreciated, when I wasn't loved the way I needed. I promised myself that Paula would never feel that way. She would always know how loved and wanted she was. And despite all the difficulties, I would be the best mother to her because she deserved nothing less. Life strangely came full circle. One day, after Alvis announced that his company was opening a new branch in my hometown and that he would be its head, we decided to move. The move was chaotic and full of stress, as it always is when you have to relocate. But there was something exhilarating about this new beginning. As we settled into our new home, I felt a strange yet strong urge to reconnect with my sisters. My parents had passed away a few years ago. I hadn't attended their funeral, and perhaps that was one of those moments that still required forgiveness. But now, in a new city, with a new life and a new family, I felt that the time had come to rebuild those lost connections. I decided to start with Conchetta and Francesca. At first, they were cautious, guarded, but then with each conversation and meeting, it became clear that they too wanted to return to the times when we were closer. We met for coffee, and the conversation, as I felt, became immediately light and easy, as if no time had passed between us at all. We talked about Paula's photos, shared stories about our families, and children, whom I had missed so much. "You've changed so much, Vanessa," Francesca said, squeezing my hand. "We're so glad you're back." This was the beginning of something new. We started having family gatherings again, celebrating holidays, restoring the connections that had once been lost. Finally, a moment came in my life when everything I had been looking for was right in my hands. Paula was thrilled to have cousins to play with, and I loved watching her find joy in their company. The family was gathering once more, and it seemed like everything was starting to fall into place. But not everything was smooth sailing. Then came Simona, our younger sister. From the moment we reunited, I noticed that she had hardly changed. Still the same spoiled girl, whose life revolved around titles and wealth, now turned into a woman who was certain that the world should revolve around her and her family. At the first big family gathering, Simona arrived with her husband and son, Bruno. As soon as they entered the house, it was clear that for her, this wasn't a reunion, but rather a competition. She immediately started showcasing her son's achievements. "Bruno, show your aunts how well you can sing," she said, pushing the boy forward. "He takes lessons, you know, the teacher says he's a wunderkind." I could barely hold back a smile as I watched this theatrical display, but then I noticed Paula had fallen behind the other children. Embarrassed, she approached Bruno, offering him a candy, shyly asking, "Do you want to share?" But before Bruno could respond, Simona sharply cut into the conversation. "Bruno, don't take that," she shrieked, tossing the candy away. "Her hands are dirty." I couldn't believe my ears. At that moment, without hesitation, I crossed the room and approached them. Holding back my rage, I addressed Simona. "What are you saying, Simona? Are you insulting my daughter? Paula's hands are clean." But Simona just coldly glanced at me, then at Paula, and with disdain in her voice, she said, "Well, with her type, you never know what might happen." She waved her hand dismissively, picked up Bruno, and added, "Come on, Bruno, let's go play with your real cousins." I stood in shock, stunned by her cruelty. It was an insult that I couldn't process right away. Simona was not only humiliating my daughter, but openly displaying her contempt. From that moment on, I knew that these family gatherings had become a real test for us. At every new meeting, Simona made it clear that she didn't consider Paula part of the family. She would loudly declare that Bruno couldn't play with Paula, because who knew what diseases she might be carrying. I couldn't just stand by. I defended my daughter at every turn, but the damage had already been done. I saw how Paula was slowly distancing herself from the other children, how her silent loneliness grew at these gatherings. She became quieter and more withdrawn. One day, I made a decision. We would no longer attend these family gatherings. Paula shouldn't have to suffer from someone else's lack of humanity. I began to decline the invitations, coming up with excuses and finding many reasons not to show up at these holidays. Concetta and Francesca, though disappointed, understood me. The family drama caused by Simona was ruining the atmosphere, and it hurt too much to see my daughter suffer from it. After the dust from our move and the family turmoil had settled a bit, I found comfort in visiting my grandmother. She had always been my support, and now, as she grew older, I felt that my role as her anchor was even more important. I wanted to be there for her, just as she had always been there for me. Every weekend, Paula and I would visit my grandmother in her cozy house. She would always wait for us on the porch, her face lighting up with joy as soon as she saw us. "Here are my girls," my grandmother would say, extending her arms. Paula, with a bright smile on her face, would run up the steps and throw herself into her embrace. "Grandma, I've missed you." This was the place where I truly felt comfort and security. Grandma loved Paula with all her heart and never showed that she was adopted. To her, Paula was simply family, her beloved granddaughter. Grandma showered her with attention and love, and I saw how Paula felt completely safe in that house, as if in a mother's embrace. But, unfortunately, time didn't stand still, and my grandmother's health deteriorated month by month. Our visits were no longer filled with long conversations as they once were. We simply sat together, and silence became part of our lives. Paula read to her, showed her her drawings, told her about school. Even when my grandmother could no longer respond, her eyes would still light up with joy. And then, when my grandmother passed away, we were there with her in her final moments, holding her hand. It was one of the hardest days of my life. Paula, wise beyond her years, climbed into the bed and curled up next to her great-grandmother. "It's okay, Grandma," she whispered. "Now you can rest. We love you." And in that moment, full of quiet sorrow, I realized that despite all the trials and pain, it was moments like these that made us stronger and gave us the strength to move forward. I stood before Simona, feeling the anger boiling inside me slowly turning into something more, something hard to control. My hand was firmly holding Paula's shoulder, trying to transfer all my strength and confidence to her. I couldn't let this woman, my sister, insult my daughter. Paula stood beside me, her face red from tears, her eyes still full of pain and confusion, but I saw in them sparks of determination, a look that seemed so familiar to me. It was the same look I once carried in my eyes when I faced injustice, betrayal. That look made me realize that now I had to protect my family, no matter how difficult it was for me. Simona continued to look at us, not hiding her contempt. Her lips twisted into a mocking smile. You think you'll protect her, Vanessa? You, who hides behind that ridiculous inheritance? Her words cut like a knife, but I no longer paid attention to her spiteful jabs. I stood firm, not allowing doubt or fear to take over me. Simona, you're wrong, I said calmly, though there was danger in my voice. Paola is my daughter, and she is part of our family. And you can try to force your lies on everyone, but I won't let you humiliate her. You won't interfere with her life anymore. I paused, feeling the tension in the air grow thicker, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Everything around us seemed to freeze. I saw the relatives' gazes moving from one person to another, some trying to look away, while others watched the situation unfold with curiosity. Bruno, standing on the other side, cast us a worried look but didn't say anything. He knew how easily Simona could manipulate people, but it seemed he was afraid of conflict. Simona spoke again, and this time her voice became almost hissing, full of anger and dissatisfaction. You think you can dictate the rules? You think Grandma wanted you to take everything for yourself and your stupid daughter? You probably forgot how easily Grandma could have changed her will as soon as you started behaving the way you're behaving now. I sighed, feeling my shoulders tighten under this onslaught. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need to justify myself. I didn't have to listen to her accusations or justify myself to those who didn't believe in me, in us. You talk a lot, Simona, but you don't understand one thing. Grandma left us everything because she believed in us. Because we were there when it mattered. You don't understand what it means to be part of a family, to be a real family. With every word, I felt strength filling me. I was no longer the girl who tried to please everyone. I was a mother. I was a woman who carried responsibility for her daughter, for her family. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. I couldn't let people like Simona control my emotions and my life. Simona looked at me with an expression of complete disdain. She wanted to say something but stopped, as if something in my gaze made her fall silent. We stood facing each other in silence, and in that moment, I understood that this conversation wouldn't change anything. Simona remained the same cool person she had always been, and I was someone else. A much changed person. And in that lay my success, my internal victory. I turned to Paola, and her eyes met mine. In them, I saw gratitude and support. My girl, she had grown. And I would stand by her to the end. Simona laughed, and her laughter was full of cool mockery that sent chills down my spine. With every word, I felt my soul fill with anger and disgust. A family of sounds, she said, her voice dripping with poisonous intonation. She's not even related to us. Just some random child you picked up. Maybe she was born to drug addicts or criminals. She has no right to our inheritance. I literally felt my hands begin to tremble, and my inner calm was rapidly slipping away. I tried to keep myself composed, but Simona's words seemed to poison the very air around us. It wasn't just a lie. It was a treacherous, shameless insult. I held myself back but couldn't allow her to continue speaking like this about Paola. You don't know anything about Paola or her parents, I growled, feeling the rage rise in my chest. It doesn't matter that she's my daughter. I love her more than anything in the world. It was the truth. My love for Paola was sacred to me, and I would not let anyone question her place in my life. Simona continued her twisted speech, convinced of her own righteousness. Her biting words about how I was using my daughter to steal money from the family, as if she could understand what a real family was. And her accusations that I was a thief sounded like the final stroke in the picture of her moral decay. But I was ready to fight. I knew that if I didn't stop her now, she would humiliate us again and again. Just as I was about to respond, Conchetta stepped forward. The determination on her face was clear, and I felt her presence become a pillar of strength for me in that moment. "Enough, Simona," she said firmly, and her words seemed to pierce through the fog in my mind. "You have no right to talk to Vanessa like that or treat Paula like that." Concetta, who had always genuinely cared for us, didn't hesitate. We were united in this. Simona was clearly shocked by this unexpected support, her eyes wide with disbelief. She turned to Francesca, who stood silently next to us. At that moment, we all stood together, a shield for Paula, a shield for each other. Francesca confidently added, "Vanessa has always been there for us, even when our own parents weren't. She raised us. She deserves every penny of this inheritance." It was hard for me to hold back tears hearing those words. Words full of love and recognition. It was the support I had never expected, but it became a true gift to me. All these years I had tried to be the perfect daughter, but I never expected that my sisters would finally understand me and stand by my side. But Simona could never understand that. Her face contorted in fury, and she spat out words full of hatred. "You're traitors. How dare you? You're betraying the memory of our parents." But there was no truth in her words. No sincerity. Only envy and a thirst for power. Francesca mocked her. "What parents? The ones who neglected us. The ones who showered you with attention but forgot about us. The same parents who refused Vanessa because she dared to get an education." Concetta nodded. "And let's not forget, Simona, how you took our parents' house and all their savings after they died. You didn't share a single cent of it with us. You took everything for yourself." This truth, hidden for so long, shook me. Simona not only didn't share but had exploited everyone's weaknesses. My sisters had never forgotten her betrayals. And I, apparently, had been blind, not seeing the full picture. Simona froze, her mouth opening and closing, but she couldn't utter a word. "Is that true?" I breathed. Francesca confirmed, her voice steady and confident. "Yes. It's all true." I felt the pain seize my chest, and disappointment and anger surged through me. I wanted to scream, protest, but I felt that it would be pointless. All that fear and anger had to be left behind. I turned to Simona, preparing to say the final word. "You don't understand anything. Your cruelty and manipulation aren't family. And you'll never understand what it means to be with those who truly love you." When she started to speak, Concetta intervened again. "Yes, she can. This is my house, and I want you to leave. We're all tired of your hysterics and cruelty." Simona was in the minority, and it was clear to everyone. With one last contemptuous glance, she grabbed her son's hand and, without saying another word, left the house. When the door slammed behind her, I felt the weight finally lift from my shoulders. Concetta, Francesca, and I embraced in silence. I whispered to her, "Thank you for being here, thank you for supporting me." It was a moment when I understood, I was no longer alone. We were one family.